Close your eyes for 1 second and imagine this. You are 19 years old. You are standing in front of a military Humvee on a street in Baghdad, the hot Iraqi sun pressing down on your neck, the smell of dust and diesel in the air. Below you, inside that vehicle, are 4 of your brothers. Men you have eaten with, laughed with, complained with, stayed up late with talking about home. And then, in one single heartbeat, something drops through the hatch right past your face and lands on the radio mount inside that vehicle. You look down. You know exactly what it is. You know exactly what it means. You know exactly what is about to happen to those 4 men below you if you do nothing. And you also know, with perfect clarity, that you are standing right at the edge of that hatch, that the open air is right there, and you could push yourself out and be clear before the world ends inside that vehicle. Both choices exist. Both choices are real. Both are available to you right now in this fraction of a second. What do you do? What does a 19-year-old boy do when the whole weight of that question lands on him all at once? Private First Class Ross McGinnis did not hesitate. He did not flinch. He looked down at those 4 men one last time, and he threw himself onto that grenade. He was 19 years old. He had his whole life in front of him, and he gave every single year of it, every single day, every laugh and every dream, and every tomorrow he would never see, so that 4 men could go home to their families. This is his story, and once you hear it you will never forget his name. Ross Andrew June 14, 1987, in Meadville, Pennsylvania, a small city in the northwestern corner of the state, where the winters are long and the people are tough and honest in the way that only people who have never had things handed to them can be. When he was 3 years old, his family packed everything they had and moved to Knox, a small borough in Clarion County, Pennsylvania, about 90 miles north of Pittsburgh. Knox was the kind of place where a boy could grow up breathing clean air and running through open fields and knowing every face on every street. It was Little League baseball in the summer and Boy Scouts on weeknight evenings and the smell of Paul's Lutheran Church on Sunday mornings. It was a town of maybe 1,000 people where everybody knew everybody and where the measure of a person was not what they owned, but what they did for the people around them. Ross grew up in that town, and he became exactly the kind of person that kind of town produces at its best. He was not the biggest kid. He was not the toughest-looking kid. One of his best friends, who served beside him in Iraq, described him later as a goofy kid, so skinny you could almost count his ribs under his shirt. He loved rap music and country music in equal measure, which tells you something about a person, that they can hold 2 different worlds inside themselves without any contradiction. He loved BMX biking and fast cars and video games. He worked part-time at McDonald's after school, saving his money, talking to customers, making everyone around him laugh, because that was the thing Ross McGinnis did better than almost anything else in this world. He made people laugh. Not mean laughter, not the kind that comes at someone's expense, but the warm, real kind that breaks the tension in a room and makes everyone inside it feel like everything is going to be okay. His fellow soldiers would say later that every time Ross left a room, the soldiers inside it were still laughing. They said you could be having the absolute worst day in the field, everything going wrong, everyone exhausted and miserable, and Ross would walk in, and within 3 minutes the whole room was laughing. That was his gift. That was the thing he carried into every space he entered. Now here is the detail that will stop you cold if you let it. When Ross McGinnis was in kindergarten, his teacher gave the class a piece of paper. At the top of that paper, in that simple way that teachers speak to 5-year-olds, it said, "When I grow up, I want to be." Most children wrote things like firefighter, or teacher, or astronaut. Ross McGinnis picked his crayon and he drew a picture of a soldier. He wrote the words Army Man. He was 5 years old, sitting at a little table in a classroom in Knox, Pennsylvania, and he already knew. Not in any dramatic way. Not in the way of someone who had been told what to want. But in the deep, quiet way of a person who is simply being honest about what is already inside them. His mother Romaine kept that paper. She kept it through all the years that followed, through all the ordinary Tuesdays and unremarkable weekends, through the Little League games and the McDonald's shifts and the drives to school, through all of it. She kept it. Because some things, you know, are important before you understand why. On June 14, 2004, Ross McGinnis turned 17 years old. And on that same day, on his birthday, he walked into the Army recruiting station, and he enlisted in the United States Army through the delayed entry program. His parents had to sign the paperwork because he was still a minor. Tom and Romaine McGinnis signed those papers. They were not naive about what it meant. The country was at war. Iraq was on the news every single night. They signed because they knew their son, and they knew that had been pointing toward this his whole life, and because the kind of parents they were did not break faith with their children by standing in the way of who those children truly were. He graduated from Keystone Junior High School in 2005. He sang in the school choir. He took automotive technology classes at the Clarion County Career Center because he genuinely wanted to understand how engines worked and had already started imagining the life he would build for himself when he came home from the Army. He was going to be a mechanic. He was going to fix things and build things and have a life that was full of his friends and his family and the people he loved. That was the plan. 2 weeks after graduation, he shipped out to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and the plan was set in motion. Basic training shaped him the way it shapes every soldier, through exhaustion and repetition and the gradual understanding that you are not a single person anymore, that your life is now braided together with the lives of the men around you in a way that cannot be undone. He thrived in it. He loved the brotherhood of it. He went on to complete advanced infantry training and was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, based in Schweinfurt, Germany, and Germany became his second life. He wrote about it on his personal blog, describing the 3 separate lives he was living: his life in Knox with his family and his childhood friends, his army life in Germany with the men he now called brothers, and somewhere in the future, a third life that he was still building. In Germany, he met a young woman named Christina Wendell, and he called her his true love and his soulmate in a letter home that his parents read and smiled at and saved along with the kindergarten drawing of the army man. He was happy. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was 19 years old and his life was full of good things. In August of 2006, the battalion deployed to Baghdad, Iraq. They were sent to a neighborhood called Adamiyah in northeast Baghdad, a mostly Sunni district that was in the grips of some of the worst sectarian violence in the entire country. Shia and Sunni militias were tearing the city apart, and Adamiyah was one of the places where that violence was most concentrated and most deadly. Insurgents operated openly in the streets. Improvised explosive devices were planted in roads, snipers owned the rooftops, and grenades, hand grenades thrown at passing military vehicles, were common enough that every soldier in the unit had been drilled repeatedly on exactly what to do if one landed in their Humvee. The drill was clear. It was practiced until it was automatic. The drill said yell grenade, alert your crew, and exit the vehicle through the gunner's hatch. The trained response existed for exactly this reason, because in combat, when a grenade lands in your vehicle, there is no time to think. Your body has to already know what to do. Ross McGinnis was the gunner. He stood in the turret, above the armored body of the Humvee, manning the M250 caliber machine gun, scanning the rooftops and alleyways of Adamiyah on a mounted patrol on the afternoon of December 4, 2006. His platoon was out on the streets of that neighborhood for a specific mission: to restrict enemy movement and to find a location for a 250-kilowatt generator that would bring electricity to over 100 homes in the area. An ordinary afternoon mission in an extraordinary dangerous place. 6 Humvees rolling through streets that had seen too much blood, driven by soldiers who were alert to everything, watching everything, because in Adamiyah you had to watch everything. Somewhere on a rooftop above the last Humvee in that convoy, a man reached for a grenade. He pulled the pin. He threw it. The grenade arced through the air and fell through the gunner's hatch, past Ross McGinnis, and landed on the radio mount in the center of the vehicle. Inside that vehicle were 4 men. Staff Sergeant Cedric Thomas, the vehicle commander; Sergeant Lyle Beeler, the driver; Private First Class Sean Lawson, and Specialist Ian Newland. 4 men, inside a closed armored vehicle, with a live fragmentation grenade sitting between them. A fragmentation grenade in an enclosed space like the interior of a Humvee does not just wound the people inside it. It kills them. Every single one of them. That was not a possibility in this moment. That was a certainty. Ross McGinnis yelled grenade. He yelled it loud and clear so his crew would hear it and brace themselves. Sergeant Thomas heard the warning and called back, asking where the grenade had landed, because if you know where it is you have a chance. But there was no chance. The interior of a Humvee is a tight, enclosed space, and the 4 men inside it were combat-locked, strapped into their seats and positions by their gear and the layout of the vehicle. They were not going to find it in time. They were not going to get out in time. Ross McGinnis was standing in the open turret hatch, above the armor, already in the one position in that entire vehicle that offered him a real exit. The trained response was right there, already programmed into his body by weeks of drilling. He could push himself out. He could be clear in less than a second. He could survive this. He looked down into that vehicle. He saw his 4 brothers. He made his choice. He dropped back through the hatch. He threw himself down onto that radio mount. He covered the grenade with his own body, pinning it between himself and the vehicle, and he held it there. The grenade detonated instantly. The explosion tore through him. The blast that would have shredded 4 men into pieces was absorbed by one 19-year-old boy from Knox, Pennsylvania, who had drawn a picture of a soldier when he was 5 years old and had spent his whole life becoming the person who would do exactly what he did in that moment. Ross McGinnis was killed instantly. The 4 men in that vehicle survived. Sergeant Thomas had a ears ringing and his door blown off its hinges. Ian Newland was wounded but alive. Lyle Bueller was alive. Sean Lawson was alive. 4 men went home to their families because of what happened in the interior of that Humvee on December 4, 2006. 4 men who would carry what Ross gave them every single day for the rest of their lives. That same morning, before the patrol went out, the company commander Major Michael Baca had signed paperwork promoting Ross McGinnis to specialist. He had planned to present it to Ross when the patrol came back. He presented it posthumously instead. Ross McGinnis was promoted to specialist on the day he died. His body came home to Knox, Pennsylvania, to the hills he grew up in, to the people who had known him since he was a little boy drawing soldiers with his crayons. The memorial service at St. Paul's Lutheran Church was filled beyond capacity. People stood in the hallways and spilled out onto the street because the church could not hold everyone who needed to be there. His teachers came. His coaches came. The people he had worked alongside at McDonald's came. And they all said the same thing. Every single one of them. In different words but with the same meaning. He would do anything for anybody. If you needed him, he was there. He was the best kind of friend that a person can be. On June 2, 2008, President George W. Bush presented the Medal of Honor to Tom and Romaine McGinnis in the East Room of the White House. The 4 men Ross saved were there, sitting in the front rows, alive because of him. President Bush read from the Gospel of John and said there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. Then he placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of a blue ribbon and handed it to Tom and Romaine McGinnis. Tom McGinnis accepted it and later said something that has stayed with everyone who ever heard it. He said his son saw a simple equation in that moment and solved it the only way it could honestly be solved. 4 means more than 1. His father called it simple kindergarten arithmetic, the kind of math a 5-year-old can understand. 4 is worth more than 1. And his son, who had been drawing pictures of soldiers since he was that age, who had spent his whole short life becoming the person who could make that calculation in a fraction of a second and not flinch, his son looked at that equation and gave the only answer that was true to who he was. Ian Newland, one of the 4 men Ross saved, said years later that he thought about it every single day. He said Ross gave them a gift, and that you could not receive a gift like that without feeling the weight of what you owed the person who gave it to you. He said you did not get to waste the life that someone died to protect. You carried it forward. You tried to live in a way that honored it. You told the story so that other people would know the name. Ian Newland said he loved Ross McGinnis like a brother, and he said he could not wait to see him again someday. Specialist Ross Andrew McGinnis is buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 60, Site 8544, among thousands of the country's heroes. His baseball glove and his Little League jersey and his childhood trophy are on display at the Little League Hall of Excellence Museum in South Williamsport, Pennsylvania, because he was the first Little League alumnus ever to receive the Medal of Honor. A building at Fort Moore in Georgia bears his name. A memorial at Fort Knox bears his name. The post office in Knox, Pennsylvania, bears his name. And every recruit who goes through training hears what he did, so that every new soldier understands from the very beginning what the word brother actually means. He was 19 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He had a girl in Germany who called him her true love. He had plans to be a mechanic. He had 2 older sisters who called him their crazy little brother, with nothing but love in their voices. He had a mother who kept a kindergarten drawing of a soldier in a box somewhere at home. He had a father who would one day stand in the East Room of the White House and explain his final act as simple arithmetic. 4 means more than 1, and somehow not break completely while he said it. Ross McGinnis had everything, and he gave all of it away in less than 1 second, so that 4 other men could keep everything they had. That is not a story about war. That is a story about love. The deepest, most complete kind of love there is. The kind that does not calculate and does not hesitate, and does not ask what it gets in return. The kind that a boy from Knox, Pennsylvania, learned somewhere between Little League and McDonald's, and 3 lives lived in 19 years, and carried with him all the way to a rooftop in Baghdad and a grenade on a radio mount and last moment that said everything that needs to be said about what a human being can be at the very top of what they are. Specialist Ross Andrew McGinnis, Medal of Honor, born June 14, 1987, killed in action December 4, 2006, 19 years old, and more of a man in 1 second than most of us will be in a lifetime. Say his name. Remember it. Because he gave everything he had so that 4 men could go home and say theirs.